On today's episode, we'll talk about the mental game behind moving up, safety on set, Goodfellas, Monsoon Wedding, and of course, being taught filmmaking by Martin Scorsese himself. Just a little bit of business before we start. There may be a curse word here or there in this episode, so please listen responsibly. As always, our website, theop.io, is up and chock full of tips, tricks, and gooey operator goodness. Make sure to check out The Breakdown, where the best operators in the biz explain shots they have done, The Musings, where we discuss everything from quick tips to larger concepts of storytelling, the answers, the images, and so much more. I may or I may not take a break or two during this episode, but I promise that none of them will be longer than 22 seconds. Finally, if you are enjoying the podcast, please follow us, write a review, share us with your parents, and talk us up around the water cooler with your friends. So grab a beverage, sit back, and enjoy the op. Thanks for listening.
Lock it up, nice and quiet, and let's roll.
Rolling. Victor 30 Echo, take 2.
Hey, Mark. Hey, Mark.
And camera set. And action.
Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to the Op Podcast, the podcast where we talk about operating and the art of visual storytelling. My name is Dave Comides, and I am your host, and I am really excited to be coming to you from Chicago tonight, where I am on location on a TV show. So if you hear the L in the background, I apologize for that, although it actually is kind of a neat sound. A great guest coming to me over the internet today from New York City, Heather Norton. Heather was a first AC for on a ton of movies and TV shows and whatever, which is where I first met her, and is now an operator. And I'm excited to talk to her about that transition and her career and everything. Some of the credits, but not all of them by any means, because there's a lot of them. As an assistant, Madam Secretary, Monsoon Wedding, Mona Lisa Smile, The Devil Wears Prada, Happyish, where we work together, Marley and Me, Mr. Popper's Penguins, Insurgent, 25th Hour, You've Got Mail, Flirting with Disaster, Before the Devil Knows You're Dead. The list just keeps going on. And as an operator, The Time Traveler's Wife, Marry Me, Scenes from a Marriage, reshoots on A Quiet Place Part 2. She is a really wonderful person, a good friend, a great filmmaker, and I'm really excited to have you. Thanks for being here, Heather.
Oh, thanks so much for having me, Dave.
Yeah, this is
Always a
I've been wanting
pleasure.
to do this for a while, but it just hasn't worked out. How's New York? Is it cold?
It's just wet right now.
Yeah.
It was last week was brutally cold, and of course, that was the week where we were outside nights, like rain, snow, rain, back, whatever, So, but that's the best thing about New York is that we're shooting on the streets of a working, living city, and it's never easy.
Yeah, that's that. Having worked there quite a bit when I was back east, I can attest. I will say I'm in Chicago. It's rainy and nasty, although it's better than last week when it was, I think they said it was 2 degrees. And then there's that stupid, but it feels like, and it was like negative
Oh, yes.
27. And it's just like, why do you even, after like 20, does it make a difference? But thankfully we are all interior. So I'm very, very happy about that.
Yeah, it was a great excuse for me to go and check those safety bulletins, and find out what is the temperature that is too dangerous to shoot in. What if,
what'd you find out?
If you are working at -5, or no, it's I guess 5 degrees Fahrenheit, which is what we were with wind chill, within 30 minutes you will get frostbite.
Really?
So you need to, have proper clothing. You need to have warming tents, and they actually have. In New York, it's really hard to find real estate for the tents, out in the street or wherever you are in the parks. They often don't let you put down tents.
Sure.
So they use, crew vans for warming, which works really well.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually remember when I was living back east, showing up at 6 p.m. in the winter, like right next to the river, and just going, the next 12 hours is going to be hell. And there's nothing I can do about it. And it doesn't really make a difference what you're wearing, because at a certain point, you either can't do your job or it gets cold. Anyway, that's a whole nother story. So tell me your story. How'd you get here? How'd you get to where you are in the business?
Well, okay. I was one of those people who didn't know anybody in the business, didn't have any connections, was completely sort of random. As I don't know. It's I did theater my whole life as a child. It's community theater. I loved that group creative process.
As an actress?
As an actress, yeah, but community theater. That's
I know.
strong. Plugging community theater here.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, it was my way that I found. It was my when you grow up in New England. There's nowhere. Nobody talks about their emotions or is expressive or anything. It was my way of letting it out.
Okay, good.
And I loved it and stuff. But when I got to college, I was like, okay, reality is hitting. I have to find something else that I can do with my life because this is not probably going to be it. So I chose a school that was in New York City because I thought if I can live in New York City, coming from Massachusetts, I will be able to live anywhere in the world.
Yeah.
And that was my goal. I love traveling, so I found a school that had a really terrible theater department, and this I probably shouldn't say what the school was at this point, but
Okay,
so I thought this will be my only protection to keep me from just automatically going back into theater.
Oh, you mean because they had a bad theater department, you were like, I won't end up there.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yes, I was like, I have to protect myself from myself,
Smart.
And so, so I veered a little bit more towards the film people because it just was similar. And I was studying women's studies, and then I ended up getting into anthropology and that kind of stuff. But it was really like I ended up doing theater off like low budget downtown theater during school, and that got me into this multimedia sort of theater production that was going on in the 80s. I'm old. This was back in the 80s. And so it was like companies that were very, very big here at that time, Mabu Mines and the Worcester Group, and they were sort of internationally respected avant-garde theater companies, and they were doing a lot with multimedia and video and this whole new technology stuff. And I used to do like street interviews for I loved it. It was so much fun. I once went out on the street and with a cameraman, and I was doing the interviews, but it was all about what was called Daydreams of a Violent Revolution. And so we would ask people, if you could create a violent revolution and create a new world order here in New York right now, what would that look like?
Whoa.
So it's just like really fun stuff. But I came from a very political family, so in terms of protesting and nonviolence and just kind of being very politically active. So theater and film and all of these things were always very connected to politics for me.
Gotcha.
And so that kind of got me back into theater, but also got me into the film people at Columbia, where I went to school. And so that turned into, I was working on a student film, working, for free, not really working, just, hanging out, I was helping the producer get craft service, to be absolutely accurate. And we finished the job, and there were a lot of NYU students on the film and working on the film because Columbia is much more of a writing program than a tech program. And so they had pulled a lot of people in, and those people said, Martin Scorsese is coming back from Morocco from doing Last Temptation of Christ, and he needs an assistant, and we need someone who will help us with our careers later. And is there anyone here that we can recommend that would maybe get that job? And they all turned to me and said, you could go interview for this job. And I didn't actually, I'm going to admit this, I didn't know who Martin Scorsese was. I never seen any of his films. And I thought, well, hey, everyone wants me to do this. I need a job. I'm going to go do this thing. And so I went and interviewed, and they were so thrilled that I was not an NYU student because they didn't want to have, someone who was trying to tie into that whole world. And so so I ended up doing 3 films with him as his personal assistant, just on the film.
Wow.
And so
what films?
It was the New York Stories, that little $4 million short that he shot for that. And so it was immediately, just transported into this incredibly large budget film world, and yet indie, so it was kind of like, top people in New York working on it. But Scorsese still, hadn't gotten the kind of recognition that he really wanted from Hollywood or anything,
Yeah. Wait, what were the other 2 movies though?
Goodfellas and Age of Innocence.
You were his assistant on Goodfellas. I
Yeah.
did not realize that. That's incredible. Wow.
It was incredible. It was like it was really appealing to all my anthropological, sociological, studies of people that were so different than anything I'd ever grown up around. And
And what were you just because maybe I don't know, like as an assistant, what were you doing for him?
I was that was the best part, was that it was my film school, because
Yeah.
I just had to be, it was like a bodyguard, but I didn't have to be protect him from anything except for people.
You're the
I
social
just
bodyguard.
yeah, social bodyguard, exactly. Just no, he's just so he could like follow me. I would just lead him to wherever and stuff. And but he was just incredibly kind and
Wow.
loved to share his information. So for me, it was like he was telling me everything about what was inspiring him to make during making that movie, and what films he'd watched all night, stayed up all night watching, and
Wow.
what references things were. And he would, that was back in the VHS days. So
Yeah. Yeah.
so he had a whole VHS library that he had a person who was employed just to record off of television the movies as research that he liked, because there was none of what we have now,
No,
right?
no,
And
absolutely.
so he had created a personal library, and so he would come in and give me VHS tapes to watch of films that you couldn't get anywhere. Maybe at Kim's Video, which used to be here in New York,
I
or
remember
something.
Tim's video. Yeah. Yeah.
But uh, but I wouldn't have known what to get, and so it was. I was like I guess for me and I was sitting right next to the monitors the whole time watching the process, and there's Michael Bauhaus, and there is he is, and I'm just like a little fly in the wall. It was absolutely incredible, and
Did did you recognize how extraordinary that was at the time?
absolutely,
You did.
it felt like I had access, and
Right. I
to
mean,
something
there are
that was
people who would
incredibly
kill for that
special. But
opportunity,
but Dave, I felt that way my entire career in the film business. I
yeah, but I get it, but that's a little, I mean, that's on a different level,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, it was very, yeah. I mean, it was definitely a world. It's the glamour, the everything, and also all that stuff. It was very obvious to me. It's nothing I'd ever seen, been
Yeah.
around, and it seemed. But it's also interesting because I think the first couple of films I was on, I even despite knowing how special and privileged I felt being there, I also felt like I don't want to work in this business on a very personal political level, because I was so disgusted with the way that women were treated on film sets. And at that time there were no women on film sets at all, only in the hair makeup department.
So wait, this would have been what, 82,
Yeah.
83?
No,
And there was,
no, it was 80, it was
I'm trying to think of when Goodfellas was. I can look it up,
I
but
think it was, yeah, I'm terrible with dates. I think it
I
was
think
close
it's
to the
early
late
80s,
80s.
no?
Late
Well, oh,
80s.
was it late 80s? Maybe it was late. Oh, Goodfellas might have been like 89 actually.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
it was
so that's
89 or something like
so
that.
even that late that there were still no women on set, maybe a script supervisor. Uh,
Well, there was. I mean, Susan Starr is someone that I eventually hooked up with,
yeah,
and she was very much a presence on set. She was, and there I knew there had been women before,
yeah,
but I just had not. I mean, I grew up on a farm. I grew up in a rural situation. I where people were people.
yeah,
There wasn't
yeah.
there wasn't this sort of role playing thing that happens in these glamour industries. And it was just, I found it really hard to take, and so I would just sort of
Wow.
but at the same time I didn't I was still thrilled to be there. I just was like trying to imagine, how am I going to fit in, where am I going to fit in,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
that was the thing that everyone told me, basically as a PA level at that point, my entry level as a PA. I had to think. They said, figure out what you want to do, like just anything. It doesn't have to be what you end up doing, but their advice to me, and I always tell this to people, is tell people what you're interested in. I mean, don't say I want to be the DP on the next project, but like, I'm interested in costume design, or I'm interested in props, or I'm interested in camera, because everyone, in my experience, will help you. If you're an entry level person and you express interest, people are flattered. People are, they want to help you. They want to be able to give back.
yeah.
And so I I found that to be true. And at first I was like, well, I want to be involved with the visuals. I mean, just the way Scorsese used it, just the way he was inspired and the work that he did with Michael Ballhaus, I feel is incredible,
That's
extraordinary.
incredible. Goodfellas is like the perfect synergy of so many different things. It's incredible.
Incredible. And so I was really drawn to that. But I didn't know how to get into the technical camera stuff. And so my next job after doing those things was to work with the production designer, Christy Zia, who is a phenomenal production designer, an incredible person, and had a history in New York theater, downtown theater, like I did. So I felt very much like this is my people, you know. And so she hired me to work as, I don't even know if this is an official title, but I basically was her visual researcher for photographs and the looks of
Okay.
of things for the Silence of the Lambs, which she was working on at that time.
Oh my gosh, I knew nothing about this. You've never told me most of this. This is incredible. Wait, so she was basically giving you like, I need to go. I mean, give me an
He
example.
was
of
off in like
you asked
Pittsburgh or
me.
wherever wherever I can't even remember where they were shooting.
Yeah.
So that,
Someone
but
tell
so
us.
she would say, I need images of like meat like lockers or like Minnesota like winters or like, you know. And I would they used to have like there used to be a lot of street vendors on the street in New York, and so I would go both to the library. They at the New York Public Library had this incredible thing. I don't even know if they still have it since everything's been digitized, but this was before that. So you would go to the photo archives and you would go like any other kind of Dewey Decimal System or whatever. You would go in and you would say, I'm looking for Minnesota or whatever, you know, was, and you would pull out the file folder and there'd be folders in there and they would have paper images just that people had thrown in that folder.
And then
it was,
would you take pictures and send them to her, or how would you get the information to her?
yeah, I would take pictures of them because you couldn't take them out or mimeograph. I don't know. I photocopy. I think that's what we did. She gave me a photocopy budget, you know, and I would they had a photocopier there at the, you know, but where my best images came from the art forum magazines and art magazines that had full plate, you know, themes on the street vendors in New York would like sell these for $1 or whatever, you know, and I just would pick up these things and the colors were incredible. There was this one thing with I remember so specifically one of the images that she loved was from a tanning house where they were tanning hides to make these colors of fabric that were being used, you know, and so you can sort of see where that's going with this sort of like, you know, with that story. But it was just visually just like beautiful stuff, but also kind of creepy, you know. So that was like, it was like a dream job, you know. It just was like
that sounds fun. Like so much fun, actually.
Yeah, it was super fun, and I couldn't believe it was a job. But
well, you know what's interesting to me is like I think of it now, and I think if someone were to ask me to do that now, I would. It doesn't seem like that much fun because I just sit in front of my computer and type stuff up. But like the whole like I got to go to the library.
Different times, yeah. It was books and things, and, you know, and I would just, you know, get these magazines, rip the photos out, and send them to her. And also it was all like I wasn't emailing stuff to her. I was, you know, putting it in a little envelope and mailing it off, you know, and that kind of stuff.
That's totally cool.
So I tried to imagine, like, is this where I want to do? Is this what I want to do? And I thought, you know, I've seen what it's like, you know, when they decide suddenly they have to change. Oh, we're not going to shoot that tomorrow because the weather changed or whatever happened. And now we have to go shoot that ballroom scene or whatever, you know, or there's something. And it's not ready. And you have to get it ready. And you have to pull stuff out of thin air, you know, and just make it happen. And I just thought, that is so stressful. Like, as much as I am enjoying this, I don't want to have to ever be responsible for that.
Yeah.
You know, creating that on that level with that, you know. And I mean, I'm sure. Yeah. Anyway, so I thought I would rather work with tools that are there, you know, that I can use and come to work every day and just like have my tools and have my stuff that are visual, you know, create visual things, but I don't have to deal with all of that, you know. And it's one of the things that I always like with Steadicam. You know, I always thought whenever it was tempted, you know, I had people who really pushed me early on to try to get into Steadicam.
Oh, really?
And I was like, oh, all that stuff.
All that stuff.
all that stuff, just in a really small apartment, like I don't, I just couldn't wrap my head around it,
Yep.
but
Yep. Yeah.
so anyway, it's funny how like when you're starting out, the things that influence you or don't, but I have to say everybody always, I felt so privileged because of the Scorsese connection, which was just random. But because of that, people would give me an opportunity. That working with, and then I hooked into the Michael Ballhaus crew um, because they wanted to help me. And
And you hooked into the Michael Bauhaus crew, meaning to start working in the camera department
yeah,
with them,
yeah.
and they
Back then, and
yeah.
this is something that's different now. But back then in New York, I mean, it was Local 644, so it was a different structure. They had a trainee program, which was very interesting because it was not a trainee, it was a trainee program for union members. So
Hmm.
you had to be in the union to be in a trainee. But the reason that it was structured like that is because back then New York was a film town, not
Yeah.
a TV town the way it
Yeah.
is now. And so there were like 4 crews that did
Really.
all the movies. You
Yeah.
know, 4 or 5. There were very few, and they did all of the movies, and so in order to create an opportunity for people to learn how to work with those crews and learn how to work on that level, they created, and also because we didn't have loaders, the second loaded, we didn't have the loader position. So
Oh,
even
okay.
on features, your second was loading. So and so they created a position of someone who could load because they were in the union and everything,
Hmm.
but that the producers would pay, and it was a lesser rate, but you got your hours, or days. I think it was days for 644. I can't remember now.
Yeah.
It was something different, but it meant that you could you could do 3 traineeships, but you couldn't do any with the same crew. So it meant that you got to meet a
A ton of
a
people.
ton of people, and it meant that if anyone moved up or anyone you know wasn't
Yeah.
there anymore for whatever reason, you had an opportunity because you now knew these people, and either the traineeship went well, or it didn't. And if it
Yeah.
didn't go well, you would not be working in the industry.
And you said 3 shifts. A shift was a movie,
A
like a
movie.
project.
3
Okay.
different, yeah, 3 opportunities to be a trainee. So my
So
trainee
this,
jobs
yeah.
were, let's see, it was Cowboy Way, um, and the still photographer on that was Barry Wetcher, and
Barry Watcher, yeah.
he was like a godfather to me. He always says, I owe him, so I do. I owe him my life.
It's
Um,
officially
yeah,
now
yeah, yeah.
on
But
podcast.
it's like people look out for you, and I'm trying to
And
remember
what
what the
were
other 2 jobs were.
the other 2 jobs? Yeah.
Uh,
But so you got in with Bauhaus, and so basically when you were a trainee, so were they basically making you the loader essentially and going, well, we're going to teach you how to load and you'll load, or did you cover the second AC when the second AC went to load?
no, you would load.
You would load.
You
Okay.
would load. Yeah,
Yeah.
it was a great benefit for those crews because, but you were also like you were the trainee, and they treated it like that. So you were being taught.
Yeah.
I worked a number of jobs with Bobby Mancuso, and he was extraordinary teacher,
One of the best first ACs out there,
you
right?
know, and Eric Swanek. I
Yep.
kind of traded off between the 2 of them, and Eric was, I learned how to use short ends with Eric in a way that was so like I was so proud of this. I think that I finished a job and we had no short ends.
So for anybody who doesn't know,
Oh,
because there are
right,
going to be a lot of
film.
people, right? Short ends were when you'd have a 400 or usually a 400 or 1,000 foot load of film, and if the scene was, if you had a 400 foot mag of film and the scene was 300 feet, you'd have to change it out every time, and you'd be left with these 100 or 80 foot short ends, and it was always that challenge to go, how do we fit the math, so we don't have anything left over, don't have a truck full of short ends. But it
Right.
occurs to me, like, most of the people working today aren't going to go, what's a short end? I don't know what a short end is.
Well, and it was so elaborate. It's true. I didn't even think about that. Yeah, all those jobs
Yeah.
for film, and that was it wasn't until I started working with Sydney Lumet that I started working in digital, and he was really a pioneer in that
Yeah.
world in New York.
Do you remember how long had you been in the camera part of the film industry, if you want to call it that, but from being a training to moving on up until you actually started pulling focus? How many years was it?
Okay. That's a good
Ballpark.
question. I seconded for a long time. I loved seconding. It
Yeah.
was, I loved the organization.
What did you love about it? What was it?
Well,
What was it?
it was film. So with film, and I loved being in charge of the gear, basically, because
Yeah.
I know it's structured differently in the East Coast and West Coast often, but the second does the time cards. The second does all the ordering of equipment, which I think is probably more the first assistant on the West Coast. I don't know, but it's just
Yeah.
and
It
and
depends job to job, I think.
yeah, and you're doing all the loading, so you're doing all the inventory, which I know we briefly mentioned short ends and stuff, but it was different batches of film. You couldn't you had to keep track of so much in different stocks, and and if there was a bad batch, you had to know which short ends came from that batch and which. It just was like elaborate, but also like working with Eric Swanek, he always returned gear back to the rental houses in better condition than it was sent out.
That does not surprise me
And
at
so
all.
I learned so much, and it was every time we got new gear, every time we got a new toy, it was like a snorkel or something, or different kinds of spray deflectors or whatever. It was always like, how do we make these work? It was like, how do we make those rods work with these rods, and those things work with this, and do you need a reversing gear, or do you need, and it just was like this, it never ended. And it sort of something I came to learn more as a first than a second was that something is always, every single job, something is going to happen. I was going to say something is going to go wrong, but it's something is going to happen that has never happened to you before. And
it's true, isn't it?
It's
it
how
really
you
is
learn.
true. And it may be small. It might not be massive, but occasionally it is. But it's true. It's also like the way that I look at it is, as a Steadicam operator, I have my yellow toolbox. And I don't even know what is in my yellow toolbox, because over the years, and I'm sure as an assistant you had something like this. Over the years, I've like thrown those like screws and those things in there because you put it all in there. And I don't even know what, and I never need anything out of it. But if I lost that, I would lose my mind, because I know someday there's something in the bottom of it that I'm going to need that's going to save me, and I can't get rid of it.
I still have that toolbox. I can't. I mean, yeah. I still have it.
Yeah, because it's out there. It's like that big problem is out there, and it's coming to get you, and you need all these things to deal with it. But it's great.
But also some of that's changed in the standardization of like film equipment, and it's also like, I mean, I just remember like you'd have to go and search out some of the tools in not really non-standard places to try to find stuff, because there wasn't wasn't film tools. There wasn't all these vendors who service the film industry before, and you just
you'd like see something and be like, oh, I got it down on Canal Street,
right,
and this
like
whatever.
that valve that you can use to use an air tank with a spray deflector, or whatever, like it's just like, that's, you got to know what that's called and where you can get it.
Well, and that's probably the way also what, like, especially as a second even, and as a first, but that's what ends up making you valuable, right? Yeah. Is because they're like, Heather will have an idea. And then you go, oh yeah, I've done this once before with Eric Swanek, and we'll fix it this way or whatever. Yeah. And then you're invaluable, because you bring all that, you just keep collecting these tidbits of stuff, but also of information, And I think, I think the thing that's changed a little bit, which I mean is good, obviously, but in a weird way, nostalgically, maybe it bothers me a little bit, is now, you'd ask around, but then you'd get on your phone and you start texting people and like, have you ever done this? Or you'd put it on a forum or something, which is good because you get the hive mind. But there was something about like, we're out on the island and we have to fix it ourselves.
Right.
And come up with something.
Well, and all of those little bits of information were treasured because they became, you were having to learn on the job, and and they became what you taught other people to do. And like Eric used to say to me, if I will always listen to you if you think you have a better idea of how I should do this. But
when you were seconding,
even load, whatever. Yeah, when I was, but I do these things for a reason. I do it this way because I've learned from things going wrong. I'm not just deciding to do this way. It's
Yep.
it's it's because if I don't do it this way, I know these other things will happen that are not good.
Yeah, yeah. That's, by the way. First of all, that's classically Eric Swanick, who we've been talking about it, but he's an incredible first assistant, and just and a great person on top of it. I mean,
Absolutely.
everything. But that's, I think that, to me, that's actually what makes people great in this business, who people who have built it, people who are good at what they do, obviously, and have built up a career and have learned from it. But it's like, look, I know how to do this, and that's why I'm doing it, but I'm also always open to the idea that maybe someone knows better
Mhm.
than I do. But until that's shown to me, and I can see it, I'm sticking with what works, because I know what I'm doing.
Well, and that's maybe
And
there's something. I mean, there's something to that too, right? There's something to that knowledge where you don't want you actually value the knowledge that you've acquired,
absolutely.
yourself, because it's and if someone doesn't take the advice that you have, it's kind of like, I really don't want to have to learn this again,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
everyone has to experience it themselves.
Everybody has their process, and we've run into those people who think that they know how to do it better. And it's like, I've been doing this for 30 years. There's a reason that I don't do X, but
Right,
if you need to do X and then fail, then
right,
then you should go ahead and do it. I mean, sometimes
right.
that's unfortunate. But so do you remember making the jump to first AC?
I
Like,
absolutely remember making the jump to the first AC because I had. Here's the thing: is that I back then, there was like January, February were pretty slow because it was movies only, and there weren't a lot of movies that come to New York at that time of the year, and so we would all go off and do these like little independent projects that didn't pay anything, and
yeah,
so I cut my teeth doing sort of like learning how to pull focus. If Susan Starr was shooting a small project, then I would go and pull focus for her, or Zach Weinstein was another guy, or like there were a lot of people who had worked in both worlds, who had the
yeah,
indie sort of connection and could do those, and were shooting their own projects, their own love projects or whatever that's called, and so it was a great place to start to do that, but also. And I think about this sometimes these days with all the strikes and everything, that I joined the union in 1992. That was the first year after the 3-year blackout of New York. So where production came back. So
what was the three? What do you mean, the 3-year blackout?
the producers
Like,
didn't
just,
shoot in New York for 3 years. Because,
you mean they boycotted,
yeah, they
essentially?
boycotted it because the union, and this is I mean up for personal interpretation or political interpretation or however you, but
Yeah,
basically the union's contracts were so strong with all the conditions that were quality of life conditions, and also the cost of living in New York is very high, right, and it always has been. So it was like premiums and various things that were in our contracts under 644 that were not in other contracts in other parts of the country, and
hmm,
so the producers were like, we've had enough of this. We're going to teach you guys a lesson. We're not going to shoot there anymore because we're done, with that. You have to give that stuff up. And
I actually was not aware that this was something that, I knew that there was a slowdown, but I didn't know it was an organized slowdown, if you want to call it that.
yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah,
So completely oblivious to that fact. My timing just happened to be that I joined the union in '92, and the first job I did was as a focus puller on a union feature, um, because they were a low budget feature, but back then we didn't have the tiers. That was
yeah.
later developed, but we had something called East Coast Council, which was a great contract. Um, but it's still around, but it allows people who want to use union people to make films when they have less money, and so nobody wanted to do this low budget film. So I got to first a job. Like, I mean, it was just kind of, and I luckily I had been doing these little jobs, so I felt like I mean, now I look back at that job, and hopefully nobody can see. I mean, I was not at the level that I should have been. I can say that now, looking back. But it was,
None of us are when we jump up,
yeah.
right?
I mean, I just, it was. I'll tell you, because it was kind of a crazy job where basically the whole job was about a limousine driver who drives it and only drove nights, and he had these clients who were wealthy, and they would just pay him to do these special routes and whatever. And so all of our shooting was at night, and all of it was in a limousine.
Oh.
And it was in the winter, and it was one of the years we had one of the worst snowstorms we've ever had.
Oh,
and so
geez.
there was actually and because the company didn't want to pay for insurance, we had to carry all of the camera gear up like 5 flights of stairs to the production office every night, and back down in the morning again. And my second was this amazing guy, Scott Belceric from Pittsburgh. I'll never forget him. He was just such a trooper. He wanted to be in the film business so bad, and I think that drove it out of him. He ended up being in the film business, but he went into like worked at Skywalker Post or something. He made a sidestep move to do some less manual type of work,
But do you remember that as being I mean, it sounds like the movie was overwhelming, but do you remember that like suddenly having to be the head of the department and pulling focus was that mentally a big?
It was great. I think it was just really what was hard about that job was the hours and the nights and the weather conditions and everything.
Yeah.
But I kind of love being in charge. I have to watch myself actually, because I like it a little too much, I think. So but it's fun. It's really fun,
Good.
Yeah.
And how long did you pull focus for?
Well, that was the thing. I did my traineeships after that job.
Oh, sorry. That was you said it was when you first got into. Okay.
So it wasn't linear,
Yes,
and I think that was just because it's about, I realized that, everyone said to me, I had a lot of friends who were in the indie world and because of training myself that way. And so they were all like, if you can join the union, if you can get in the union, we can't. So do it, and take those jobs, because those people, that's gonna, you're gonna have a livelihood. We're struggling here. And I had kind of wanted to start out in documentary. With my anthropology sort of background, I had been, Margaret Mead. I was like all into I'm going to be doing documentary filmmakes. And then this happened, and I just fell into this. And how do you walk away from that?
No, it's what happens. And also, like, you meet people and you're like, I like working with you. I don't want to work with you again. I mean, that's life gets in the way.
Yeah.
It's that old thing. Right?
So I guess what I consciously chose to go back down to that and do my time and come up as a second, and then, but when I had been working with Michael Ballhaus's crew and Florian Ballhaus's crew, and Florian also hired me early on as a first. He was really the person who helped me bridge that transition.
Florian was an operator at that time?
His first, well, I don't know if I think he had done stuff, but he took me to Germany to do a job with him where he was operating. And it was, and he had been firsting before that, I guess. And so he was doing that as an operator. And I think he was operating and DPing. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, that's what they were doing there. And he bumped me up to the job for him.
And that was when you made the transition, basically.
What happened was I was working on this. I told this story at the awards, the SOC awards, but basically I had been working as a second on, and it was on Robert Redford film. It was The Legend of Bagger Vance, and I'd been working with them as a second for a while, key second, and with Susan. Susan was the first, and they had to splinter off to do a shot of the actor running straight at the camera in a flashback war sequence, on a 300 millimeter lens, whatever. And Florian was like, Heather and I will do this. You guys go on. I don't know how it was decided, but so we did one take. I had nobody with me. I had no seconds or anything. We just did that. But, and I just remember this. So he took his eye away from the eyepiece and he goes, all right, we got that, and I was like, and he turned to me and he goes, I'm never hiring you as a second again.
That's great. So, what a great story.
That's was, I was terrified of not having a job, not
Yeah.
having because there was,
Yeah.
plenty of people for him to hire. But
Yeah. By the way, you mentioned it, and I didn't when I introduced you. And I'm sorry, I can't believe I skipped on this. You got the lifetime achievement. Was it called the Lifetime
it
Achievement
was,
Award
yeah,
from
I
the
know.
for your work as an assistant. And actually, I sat at your table. You invited me, and I came and it was a great evening. So I should have mentioned that earlier, and I apologize. I kind of forgot about that. What was that? Was that 5 years?
That was the year of COVID. That was 2000.
I was just going to say COVID screws on my
Yeah,
timeline line, so that was probably
2019 or
2020,
2020. 2020.
2019, just before.
2020.
Yeah, yeah. No, it couldn't have been 2019 because 2020 was COVID. Yeah.
Right.
Anyway, whatever.
Yeah.
but
Oh, right. Of
but
course.
again, an amazing achievement that they chose you to honor you for the work you've done.
It was surreal. It was truly incredible.
Was that a cool experience for you?
Amazing experience.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that the thing that was the most amazing for me, besides the, just getting to dress up and play, that role, was that it actually made me look back at what I'd done, which I never did before. I never looked back.
No.
I was looking forward. And so at first I was like, what are they? They're crazy. Like, why are they giving it to me? And I just didn't. I thought, well, it's a Me Too. It's a whatever. And then I looked back and I started remembering all the incredible people that I'd gotten to work with, and just flooded with all these experiences and stories and things, and it was overwhelming.
It's pretty cool. Yeah, because you're right. You don't. You just sort of go to the next job.
Yeah.
And you remember it, of course, but you don't sit back and recollect on
Yeah.
it, really. I mean, I've had a couple of things here where I've introduced people and I list off some of their credits, and people are like, "Wow, that guy sounds really interesting," or that woman sounds interesting. Because we don't. I think we all just sort of move forward to the next.
Well,
the next hurdle.
that New York Stories section that with Scorsese, that was shot by Nestor Almendros.
Oh
and
my gosh.
so it just was.
How old was
he? Was
at
pretty
the time?
old at the time. I don't remember how old, but it's probably in his 70s.
I was going to say must have been one of his last films.
Perhaps, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty cool.
Just and then of course when Sydney passed away, it was just kind of like these people. They're just the experience.
And they're such a massive part of the industry. But it's so amazing that you got to work. What was working with Sydney Lumet like?
It was really he was so fun, and he's the first person that really made me aware of editing, because he shoots like it's live multicam TV, and so
what do you mean?
I mean, that job, the first job we did with him was on ped cameras, and he shot it like the whole thing, everything was a stage. Except for occasionally, we'd go out, but mostly it was all stage work, and it was all we had fiber optic cable pre-rigged to all the stages, so that you just hooked in when you got there, into the different areas, and you just roll around or whatever. But it was he never shot a full master, because he knew he would cut into it.
He just knew.
He knew exactly what he needed. He knew exactly what lens he wanted.
Really?
He knew, and not only did he know what lens he wanted, he would do the math for the digital, translation for the video lenses, and he would, because we were using film lenses, but for digital cameras, so he would say, "Well, I need I need a 23 millimeter or a 17 millimeter or something," and you're like, "Well, we don't have and he's like, "Well, no, just put the camera here on your 18 or whatever," like.
The 25 will be this far away.
Exactly. He knew exactly what size he was wanted.
Amazing.
He knew exactly, and I remember one time he would, so it was fascinating to watch the process, because he would say, like the actors would do one take and he'd be like, "Great, moving on," and they'd be like, "Whoa, wait a minute, I think I'd like to know," and he's like, "Honey, I got it, I got it, that's fine, I got what I needed, you're great." And then, so they learned to perform in the first take, because they knew they didn't have the luxury. If they didn't do it, they may not get another take. I mean, if they really begged, they would or whatever. And then I remember one time we had an actress who came in was a a well-known actress, and she came in at the end of one of the TV segments, and she kept asking for another take, and he turned to me and he goes, these actresses, they never want the job to end. They never want it to end. He's like, the first day we start shooting, I want to be in the edit room. I'm already over the film. Like, I don't want,
Wow.
and it was true. I mean, he enjoyed the process, but he really didn't crave the process or love the process. He just used it to get the edit
It was a
material.
means to the end to get to the editing
Yeah,
room and
which is
craft it.
fascinating.
That's wow. That's
With
amazing.
really short days, also, 8-hour days or less.
Well, I mean, if you're not doing that many
Yeah,
takes and he knows everything
yeah,
ahead
it
of time, right?
was crazy.
That takes most of the time
Yeah,
out of there. That's really incredible. So how long did you pull focus for before you jumped up to operating?
probably 25 years.
25
I don't know
years.
exactly, but it
So
was in the 20s,
we'll give you a year or two there. So I think it's safe to say you were an established focus puller at that point. People knew you as a focus puller. What was jumping up to operating like for you?
Well, it was with Florian again.
Right.
He was
So
doing a
protected.
large romantic comedy, and so he asked me if I was interested in doing the job, and I said, I would like to, would you consider me for operating? And he's like, well, let me think about it. And
Mhm.
he came back and he said, well, it's a romantic comedy. I think it's a good job to transition on. It's like
Yeah.
it was an A camera steady cam, and they were going to be doing, it was the B cam was definitely getting the little bits that were going to go in between,
Hmm.
and uh, and he said, but I will fire you.
I love it. I love it. I'm so happy to hear that. That's the best because it's how it has to be,
Yeah,
right?
he's like, you have to do
Because
the
he's got a
job. I'll
job.
hire you, but you have to be able
Yeah.
to do it.
Yeah.
And he
Good.
said, and he was also
Fair enough.
concerned because he's like, he had been working less and less in New York, and even though we'd done jobs all over the place, and traveled and
Yeah.
everything, um, he was hiring more locally wherever he went these days, and so and working more in Europe and stuff. And so he said, I just want to make sure this is what you want to do because I may not be working in New York soon, and I can't help you. So
That's
when you do the
that's so
one,
nice.
he was concerned about that,
Yeah.
but he said maybe maybe it'll help the fact that people are trying to be more diverse, and that hopefully that will help you.
Yeah. This was when?
That was 2019.
So just before just before
Yeah.
COVID. Your
Oh yeah,
timing
no,
is
oh yeah, it's
perfect.
been great, right? COVID strikes. Yeah, it's been awesome. In fact,
Good Lord.
that led to the next job that we sort of talked about a little bit before, which is the scenes from a marriage, which was the
Yeah.
job I did after that, and that was a full-on COVID job, early in COVID, full
Uh-huh.
protection, like nobody on set except for the operators,
Oh God, I hate it.
all headset. It was.
Headsets and plastic
I learned
shields
a
and
lot of I learned an enormous amount on that job because I really hadn't had the experience as an operator, especially on a small set like that, where it's so intense. I mean, what an intense,
yeah.
intense um, acting experience,
Subject
subject
matter.
matter. Yeah, and
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
with those actors who were incredible, and
Hmm. Hmm.
here we were in this very intimate space with them, and it was and so we had headsets, which was a blessing and a curse, more a curse to me than a blessing, because it's like it really trains you not to follow your instincts and not to do anything, because you get so used to having someone telling you stuff all the time, and it was very that I learned that was a bad habit I learned on that job that I had to unlearn. You know,
I just want to, for anybody who listens to the podcast, I just want to point out that I did not tell Heather to say that. I have said this so many times. It's a huge pet peeve of mine. Like headsets have their place. They have remote heads. The DP is half a mile away, and I mean, they have their place, understandably. But especially for up and coming operators, when DPs put headsets on them, you said it perfectly. They stop following their instincts because when you started operating without headsets, and when I started operating without headsets, it was here's what we want, go sit behind your camera and get it, and you had to make a choice, and you hope to God that you made the right choice. But I think that
And it's also about trust. I mean, I think you build a certain amount of communication and trust, and he was, the DP on that job was really went way out on a limb, kind of hiring newer people. Like, we had a newer Steadicam guy who was very good, very good,
Yeah.
and then he was still that DP likes to operate, and at that time, and now I'm pretty sure he's mostly directing now, but you know, he was required to have an operator, and so it was a situation where I was hired. Nobody wanted to take a standby job, and I was like, "Are you kidding me?" To be like learning from this guy whose work I love, and to just be able to.
And what was the name of that DP, by the way?
That was Andre Perec, and he, he was already starting to go towards directing at that time. He'd been sort of juggling both jobs and stuff, but I don't know. He was required by the union to hire a standby operator, and so I came in as a standby operator, thrilled to just because I knew it would be what I made it. What I took away from that job. I wasn't going to be one of those standby operators that was going to sit on the truck and wait to be, or whatever. I was like, and but also it's such an intense set. I knew that I might not be able to be on set or be around. But I kind of, just anytime I could be there. First day, I was like, he's running back and forth to talk to the director. It was, again, the COVID thing meant that everyone had to be separate and far apart. So it was really, and I would be like, let me sit at the camera and I'll just, and you can communicate to me, or if you want to do the shot, so it ended up, he allowed me to do a lot more than I had thought it was going to be. But it was a very odd position because everyone looked to me as the A-camera operator, since that's what I was on the call sheet. And yet I wasn't acting as an A-camera operator, and so I learned a lot about what A-camera operators do, but I also was not running, the set. I was not in charge of things in the way that normally would be, and so I learned a lot on that job. And
I can imagine. But most of your work as an operator has been as a B camera operator.
Yeah, right? Everything else is pretty much the no. Well, the only job I did do last year, or no, let's see, because of the strikes, it was the year before. I'm crunching time.
I know. It gets
crazy. The year before that, I did a job that was a horror film with my old buddy Tas Mikos, who
Mikos, how cool,
who I adore, and he was doing this job with Pete Davidson and a director who he had worked with a lot, who does these really, really sort of political horror films.
Cool.
And so he was excited to do it, and so he hired me as the A-camera operator on that job, and Becca Venezia was the B camera operator, and she was excellent, and she got to go out and do all kinds of fun artsy stuff in the snow and whatever. But it that was a true A-camera operating position.
Yeah. So going back to when you jumped from 25 years of assisting, where I got to assume by that point you can do it in your sleep, and there are still challenges, but like, you know what you're doing, you know what your job is, whatever. To jumping into operating, what's the mental game that happens there, and how do you deal with it? Were you nervous? Was it frightening? Were you sort of wondering whether you could do it, or have you seen enough that you sort of figured I can pull this off?
I have to say that, first of all, as a first assistant, even having done it that long, or even as a second assistant, and this is just who I am and my personality, but I never felt like I knew what I was doing. I mean, and that didn't come out right, but okay. I always felt like I had to prove myself every single time. It never felt like, I definitely felt like I knew how I wanted things set up. I knew I knew how to think. I knew how to approach the job.
Do you think that some of that has to do with the fact that you're a woman in an industry you came into that was male dominant, and so you feel that you have to overprove yourself?
Probably, I think that's individual. I think everyone reacts to that in a different way. Gotcha. For me, I mean, I was incredibly fortunate in that everyone who hired me wanted me there, you know.
Yeah.
And when people didn't, I definitely, I had one experience where I came in. Bobby Mancuso brought me in on a job that he was doing to be a loader, and I walked on the camera truck, and the guys on that camera truck turned to me and said, what are you doing here? And I was like, I'm the loader, and they were like, well, can you hang out off the truck? Because like, this is like our locker room. We really don't, want to have you
Wow.
on the truck. It's just, it's not fun for us. And but
That's
that only
amazing
happened to me once, and those are the people I just didn't end up gravitating towards after
Yeah.
that, because it's like but I was incredibly fortunate that there were people out there,
Yeah.
like Florian or like Declan or like all these people who just have been incredibly willing and and appreciative of having women on their sets.
Yeah. So, but going back to
Yeah, so the
part of the
operating.
question that I was asking about, what was there a mental game that you had? Like, I mean, is it
Yeah, absolutely.
is it so new that like, oh my God, can I even do this? Or do you go, I think I know what I'm supposed to be doing because I've been near it all this time. Like,
There is so much, and I guess the reason I brought all that up is just because um, I do know all this stuff. I have been
Yeah.
around this stuff, and I don't acknowledge it, but I do know it, and so my mental game that I have to play with myself is to say, you can do hard things. You
Oh yeah.
you just use the stuff. You just stop worrying about it and just do it.
Yeah.
Because you
Yeah.
actually know how to do this. But also, one of the things that I'm learning is that people work so much better with you when you actually look to them to help you and you collaborate with people. So that idea that you have to know everything or you have to come in and solve everything and tell everyone what to do and how to do it doesn't
Yeah.
create friends and colleagues working that like to work with you. And so
That's great. Yeah. Yeah.
that it's almost like I've had to talk myself off the ledge, going, not only do you not need to do that, you shouldn't do that behavior.
Well, I was just going to say it's not only that they want to work with you, but it's a better product, and the product's the wrong word, but it is a better outcome in the end when you have more voices to a
Well, and
point.
it's so much more
Obviously.
fun.
Hopefully they're good voices, but it's so much more fun. There's no question. I'll tell you, I'm working on the show, and this PA came up to me yesterday, and it was very funny. He was very sweet. He's a young kid, and he said, "Hey, can I pick your brain at some point? Is there some point I could talk to you just about this business and whatever?" I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "Just let me know." And I was like, "Well, we're talking right now. You can just." So I said, "What do you want to know?" And he goes, "Well, I'm not a director, but I do direct things." And I said, "Okay, then you're a director." So whatever, And he said, "What do you think? What's advice on how to, what should a director have in this and that?" We got into this conversation, and I said to him, "Look, the best directors that I know, and this goes for camera operators and DPs and everybody, who come in with an idea, they know exactly what they want to do, or they can figure out very quickly exactly what they want to do, and yet they're willing to completely throw it out the window if something better is presented." And he said something to me that really it didn't surprise me, but I had never thought about it. And I told him, I said, "I'm stealing this." He said, "Oh, it's sort of like a barber." And I said, "What do you mean?" And he goes, "Well, I go into the barber shop and I know exactly how I want my hair cut, but he is looking at something that I've never seen, and he has skills that I don't have, so he can shape it into something exactly what I want, but even better." And I went, "That's an amazing
Yeah.
analogy," but it is the same kind of thing, right?
Yeah, and it's also
And
like that, like I remember I sort of, one of the things that I did before I took the plunge, or after that first job with Florian, when I was now going to have to go out and work with other people, was I met with a lot of people for coffee, operators, DPs, and I just said, just to say, what advice do you have and stuff, and they said, and now, and then it's funny how that works. How then you start doing the jobs, and that advice comes back to you when it actually you think you know what they're saying, and then you go, oh,
that's what they meant.
what they meant.
So do you remember
Yeah,
any
like
of
I
these?
remember Pete
Any of these
Agliato was like, just no matter what people tell you about how you get the shot, like what they want, just know that your job is to make it a good shot. So however you have to do that, you always try to make it better. Just always constantly try to make it better. And I run into that all the time, where like and I'll catch myself because someone will say, like, oh, well, make sure, you don't do this, or you should use this head, or you should do this thing, or you should, they give you this little tip, and you're like, oh, okay, all right, let me get this, thing. And then you do it and it's not
We do
working.
that.
And you're like, what? And then they're like, why are you doing that? And you're like, oh, right. Because that isn't working. So why am I doing that? So it's kind of like I have to keep reminding myself, people will tell you things, take it with a grain of salt. Like, but if it doesn't make it a better shot, do what makes it a better shot.
Do what makes it a better shot. It's exactly right. I was teaching, well, co-teaching with a lot of people, a Steadicam course months ago now, and we had a question and answer period. And one of them said, "Can you think of a shot that you just did and you put the rig down and you went, I nailed that?" And I went and I didn't even think about it. And I said, "No, it's never happened." And Buzz Moyer's in the back of the thing, and he goes, "God, that would be fantastic, wouldn't it?" And like all of us were like, "Yeah, no, I mean." All you do when you put the rig down is you go, God, I could have come around that turn better. And they may go, we got it in one, we're moving on, we love it. And you may not argue with them, but you're like, oh, if I did it better, if I did it one more time, there's always something.
But that's the kind of focus, right? That's because your brain is so active while you're doing it that you're assessing every single little thing that you're doing, going, oh yeah, I could this next time I could do this, or try to, how can I make this better? It's just like,
yeah. But at the same time, but at the same point, you have to know how to police that, right? Because you can become your own worst enemy. Because, everybody wants every shot to be perfect, but the director also has a schedule and has to worry about their actors and other things, and your needs are not the priority, but you do the best that you can, and so there is a thing that I think newer operators in general struggle with. I've found, which is being what's the word I'm looking for? Which is making statements. I need another one. We had a problem, but as opposed to, well, the beginning was kind of good, and then in the middle there was this little thing, and do you find that you struggle with that as a I mean, relatively in the larger scheme of things, newer operator, or did what I'm sure happened as an assistant translate over? Because as an assistant, you probably went, I need another one. And does that translate over, or is it a whole new process of like learning that confidence?
That is a really good question, and I was warned about that a lot. So
everybody does,
how important it is. Dave Dunlap used to always say, when you can't be tentative when you take your eye away from the eyepiece or from the monitor or whatever it is now. You can't be like, oh, you have to be like, that was great, or I could make it better if you wanted me to do this, but you choose those words very carefully. So I've tried very hard to make sure that I'm actually doing that. There was something.
Well, I think when you start operating, you're second guessing yourself all the time, no matter what, just because it's there's so much that's new, right? And overwhelming. And so much is being asked of you to like really commit to stuff, right? Commit to frames.
One of the things that I find is that because I came up in features and television is now, mostly what I've been doing. I mean, I actually have done a couple features in the last few years, but most of the bread and butter in New York is television. And so I'm having to learn that how much more communication I have with the director, and that's what's so different about operating
compared to being an assistant. You're saying,
because I mean, and because it's TV. Like in a feature situation, if I have a focus question or a question about what the shot they want or what it's always the DP that is it has that the director is working with the actors, but the visual sort of thing was always in the DP world, whereas that has completely shifted. And so now it's like often, especially like the show I'm on now, the director that we just worked with is the creator of the show, and he is incredibly prepared, of course, and knows exactly what he wants, and he's open for other he's an incredible creator, collaborator, and everything. He's always open to new things, or different ideas, or better ideas, or different things. But he is very specific about what he wants, and he will tell you that. And so it's, for me, shifting and talking to the director and collaborating with the director and letting the DP, keeping the DP in the loop because of lighting and everything else. So of course, it's like, yeah, I can get this shot, but let me just check with the DP. Let me just check and make sure that they're prepared for that, or, whatever. And just that balance, that's been a really fun privilege to be able to do that kind of communication directly.
Do you miss pulling
I
focus?
did in the beginning a lot. But I was an old school focus puller, and so it has changed so much, and the technology has changed so much that and also I what I missed was that collaboration with the operator. And when it started being less of that anyway, I just kind of wasn't enjoying it as much, which is part of my motivation to switch over. And then, of course, as an operator, I'm like, well, I miss having the focus puller right there.
I know, right? You never had that. But we worked on Happyish together, and some of my favorite moments were sitting with you right next to the camera and us just, bickering back and forth about stuff. But I want to ask you about one thing that we didn't talk about. When you were assisting, you did a couple of movies in India, right? Including Monsoon Wedding, and
I did the reshoots for Monsoon Wedding. They actually had film damage, like the X-rays at the airport. They damaged some film, which was horrible. But it gave me the opportunity to go and do the job, to do some of the job. I had not been available for the job. I had been working with Declan and Mira. We'd already done a movie together, and so they had, so it was nice to be able to go over. But it's also like one of the things that I wanted to get into a little bit, if you have time, is just some of the safety issues and stuff.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm going to ask you about that
and I just, it's a very different, people are more expendable there in a way that it's just different culturally, and everything. But the film industry there has been there for, I wish I knew how long the film industry had been in India, but it's got a huge history of film industry. This technicians are incredible, and they just have a different way of moving gear and moving stuff and handling everything, because it's all people based, rather than
because people are inexpensive to hire, so you just hire them. And Sanjay Sami, who's a key grip over there, told me that also, at least on maybe on all budget movies, but at least definitely lower budget movies, is you'll show up one day and you'll be the boom operator, and you'll show up another day and you'll be the camera operator.
Our camera truck driver on Monsoon Wedding was also the stunt double for the leading actress, because he would just put a wig on, and he would drive the car, do whatever. And he was also he was a very educated electrical engineer. He could do anything, rig anything. And he would just be like, if you had an issue or you needed a fuse or you needed whatever, he would be like, I'll go down to the market tomorrow and I will get that for you. And he would come back with whatever, from a, it was just incredible.
So where were you in India for when you were filming?
For both of those films shot pretty much in Rajasthan, because it's sort of so colorful and, that look that, people think of.
And was it, did you show up on set and it was like, oh, this is a set and I know how it runs, or was it a completely different animal from what you were used to?
Well, Declan was the DP, so that was familiar. On the first job, that I had, it was me and I got to bring my second. And so that was all pretty normalized for me. But the way that we, I learned a couple things about carnets and how to get gear there and everything. I learned never put Israeli arms on your carnet, because the flexible, monitor arm. I don't know what you call it now, but
no. And for anybody who's listening, a carnet is basically a passport for equipment, which has an exhaustive list of. I know as a Steadicam operator, it's overwhelming when I have to create a carnet, but as an assistant, it's got to be even more so, because you have to have the name of the thing, the serial number, how much it weighs,
country of origin, all that kind of stuff.
And Israeli arm is like this little I don't know what it's like an armature that you put a monitor on, but I could see how it coming through and saying Israeli arms. They're probably like, "Whoa, we're going through every single thing in here." And when you come to it, it doesn't say Israeli arm on it, so it's not like they can find it.
Yeah,
That's
there were a
pretty
couple
funny.
of good stories like that, but basically
I bet.
um,
I mean, this is a stupid question, but is it sort of still broken down into like there's the grip department and the electrical department and the camera department and the sound department,
yeah,
whatever?
pretty much. I mean, I'm sure that the grip electric thing, I wasn't paying. I mean, I noticed the difference more. I did 2 jobs in Germany, and I noticed there more the difference between grip and electric than I did in India. And I don't know if that was just me not being as aware of who was in which department because I was just there for the reshoots.
Gotcha.
So for that job, so I may. I mean, they may have been functioning differently, but in Germany, it was
Sure.
definitely like you did not pick up the camera. I would be like fighting for the camera as a first assistant. The grips, the
Because there's
grips
a
carry
grip
the
who's in
camera around
charge
and
of
pick it up
moving
and
the
move it and
camera.
stuff. And I was
Yeah.
just like, well, I don't understand what's going on.
I think that's an
Yeah,
English thing
yeah.
as well. I
So
think.
that was
Yeah, yeah,
interesting,
yeah.
and but the yeah.
Fighting with some grip over the camera.
But otherwise, it's very sim. It was very similar for me. I didn't notice really anything, and
Yeah.
we had a British operator who came with us, who was originally from
Uh-huh.
India, and so yeah, I mean, just everyone was so wonderful. That crew was incredible. I have lifelong friends, from that job.
Yeah. Oh, that's wonderful. That's absolutely what a treat to be able to do. I mean, that's the best part of this business is like you
The
pick up the
best,
phone and 2 weeks later you're going
but it's
to
not just
India.
going. It's.
You
I mean,
know,
I love traveling, but I love working with local people from wherever you go, and to me,
absolutely.
that's what's the really valuable part. You learn so much, about
Yeah.
your own biases, your own like, oh, I thought everybody did this way, or the guys that are Indian crew like didn't speak any English at all. Except, I mean, not I shouldn't I should be fair. There was definitely English speakers, but there were a number of people in the crew that didn't, and they thought I spoke Hindi because we were talking about we were mostly we didn't need to say the words to know what we needed and how to
Yeah.
communicate, and we
You
still
still
communicated very
communicated. Yeah.
easily. And they would just laugh at me because they would be like, "Oh, you know what we're saying," and I'd be like, "No, I have absolutely no idea
I have
what you're
no
saying,"
idea what you're
you know.
saying. That's fantastic. Oh, great. That's just great. I want to ask you one thing that I have on my list about. You've had you've had an incredible career, and clearly you've worked with some really really big name actors and some not big name actors. Do you have any advice for up and coming camera operators as to how to work with tougher actors? What tips on endearing yourself to actors? How to introduce yourself to I mean, just anything, because that's always, I think that's one thing. There's operating, which is like landing a frame and the gear and whatever, but then there's the interpersonal stuff, which is tough. And I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on that, because it's someone who a lot of your career was sitting at the camera 3 feet away from an actor who's in a love scene or something
It's
like
so
that or
different
whatever.
as an operator and as a focus puller, because as a focus puller, I spent my entire, I mean, especially sitting next to the camera, not when I, because I was so
Sure.
close. I spent my whole career being invisible, trying to wear a cloak of darkness, just be there, but not have them acknowledge me, because
How do you do that? How do you do that?
I just, I would just like avert, it was not like I was averting my eyes, but it just was like, I wasn't like telling jokes and being very boisterous and loud and whatever. I would just be very respectful, and I
Yeah.
feel like as an operator, I'm having to do something that Michael Bauhaus actually taught me, which is all like to be self-aware enough that you're not so focused on your job that you always say hello and you always smile, like when you first see
Hmm.
someone in the day, and you just make that initial contact instead of just being buried in your work and thinking, oh, how am I going to do this and what's going to happen, and just being business oriented, like they really appreciate it if you just
You're a
yeah, you're
human
a human
being,
being, but
right?
also not. I don't know. I also grew up on a in a resort island where we had famous people there all the time, and we always prided ourselves in treating them like normal people, and then like so I kind of grew up with that sense that you don't go, oh my God, you're so and so, or you just treat people like
Yeah.
normal people. I mean, it's kind of like there's that awkward point where you're trying to treat someone like a normal person, but you can't actually say, well, how's your family, or how's it going? You're like, I can't actually talk to you about any things I would normally talk to anybody about, but I can still treat you
Yeah.
like a human.
Well, it's funny you say that, because some of the best conversations I've had with big name actors and actresses have been those normal conversations. But but it's not because I've gone up and gone, hey, let me ask you a question that might seem like prying into your life. It's like I've said something to the assistant about my daughter, and someone's been standing nearby and be like, oh yeah, my kid plays soccer too, and it's like, oh yeah,
Right.
really? What do you do? And then you're not talking to so and so who won an Academy Award. You're talking to a parent as another parent, and suddenly there's a
Yeah.
connection there. So. But again, I think it comes back to, like you were saying, you treat
Right.
them like human
And how was
beings,
your weekend? And how was it? Just like kind of bringing you back into.
yeah. And it is very funny because that you said that, because I have noticed before that, and I don't know whether I've ever consciously did this, but I've noticed that I don't do it. Is I won't say to an actor, like a name actor, like, "Did you do anything good this weekend?"
Mm-hmm.
Because it's sort of going, "Hey, I want to
Exactly.
know what big party you went to or whatever." But I will say, "Hey, did you have a good weekend? How was your weekend? Or did you get some rest or something? Something like that. That's innocuous." And yeah, again, it is a
Yeah.
weird fine line, because the thing is, the reality, and having known some people personally who are larger actors, everybody seems to
Yeah.
want something, and they're on their guard for that. So the more you can sort of passively show that
Right.
that's not what you're about, you're just like, look, you're a person and I'm a
I think
person.
like
Let's
using
just,
someone's name, really important.
yep.
Really, I'm terrible with names. It's what plagued me my entire career. And so if I struggle with someone's name, it's especially if they're an actor. I mean, come on, that's like that's the
Yep.
worst possible thing.
Yeah. I know your
Right.
name's Bono, but I can't remember Bono. That's exactly right. And actually, I definitely remember times on Happyish when 8 episodes in, you and I'd both be on the camera and be like, "What is that actor's name?" And you're like, "I don't know." We both be like rifling through because neither of
Someone
us
just
could
taught me
remember it.
something that's really the operator I'm working with right now taught me something that I will take away forever, which is
Yeah.
is to write the stand-ins names, write the names on a piece, like on your call sheet, on anything. Just write them, use your hand and write it with a pen, not on your phone
Yep.
and not whatever, and do that every morning so that they're just, gets to that part of your brain.
Yeah.
Really smart.
Yeah, no, there's a lot to that. It's I don't know,
Yeah.
mechanical or whatever. Well, I know my folks taught me that when I was a kid. That when I used to study, they were like, write the notes that you need to know, because for some reason there's a more visceral
Yeah.
memory of that. But I've done that, but I don't do it every morning, and maybe I should, because I'm
Well, that's what I
terrible
was
at
thinking, right?
multitasking.
Yeah, I don't. It's. I want to get into the habit of doing that, and it's.
Well, and the show I'm on right now, we literally have a cast of like 25 people. And so it's not even like it's not even like, the show where it's 6 people and they're in every day. Like, we won't see someone for a week and a half, and I'm like, oh God, now I got to figure out who that is again. And so, yeah, you come up with all sorts of, and I'm looking at my sides quite a bit. You mentioned safety, and I want to bring that back around to that. You were the chair of Local 600 Safety Committee until you decided it was time to step aside, and then guilted me into becoming the chair of the Local 600 Safety Committee, which I appreciate, and I understand why, it's a tough job. But just talk to me about, safety, and also just working for the union, because how many years were you on the board of the union?
I don't know. I'm terrible with years, but it was. I think I was about. I think I was. I
Wow.
started out. I would go to meetings and stuff just as a member, but then I started. My first step was becoming the recording secretary of the Eastern region, and then
No.
I became the vice president. Of the Eastern region, which then makes you the first vice president of the national. Once
Yeah.
we merged, so. Um, so that I did that. I was that 3 years as vice president, probably, I guess, another 3 years. I can't remember if I did the recording secretary 1 3 year cycle or two. Um,
You put your time
yeah,
in, though. I think would you suggest for younger people
I
to,
tell people
or
all
how
the
would you
time that
suggest for
a lot of my work comes from my involvement with the union. Just know, I mean, the DPs that I know now, I know them
yeah,
from them being active union members, and them getting to know me that way, and just me as a person, and just that
yeah,
social
yeah,
networking and stuff. And also just because you really bond, over issues and working together and collaborating, and they can trust you. If you're collaborating with someone over something as complex as democracy, in politics, and a labor union is probably the most democratic organization in this country, um, then you can do that on a set, you know, but
yeah.
it's just also a familiar
Yeah.
face. And I tell people all the time, it's networking. Get out there and you'll meet people you don't know. You'll also, the people who tend to be involved with politics of the union are usually people I respect a great deal personally. Like they're just people who have ethics and things they're people I want to work with, in general.
Well, because they're willing to take a stand and
Yeah.
do something as opposed to the community. The other thing about being involved in the union is it's just fun. There's no
Yeah.
stress. There's no points where you're frustrated at all, right? It's just a big party. No, I don't say that against our union. I say it probably against any is like when you get a group of people who are
Well,
committed.
I mean,
They're
yeah, the
this isn't
reason I
too
wanted to
mad.
get involved in union stuff was because I, again, grew up in a political family. I felt this need to do something, and I just didn't have the time to do it outside of
Yeah,
work. And I thought, well, if I'm going to be involved, I want, I want to understand politics on something that I really care about, that really affects me, and why
yeah,
not do it on something that really does, affect the quality of
yeah.
life and the quality of our jobs. And it really helped me understand how complex and tough that is, and how hard it is to get anything done because we show up, we do our jobs, we get a van, we do whatever, we're basically don't have to run our lives very much when we're on a job. It's kind of all
Yeah.
set up for
You follow
us.
you you follow the
You get fed,
directions
you can do
somewhat.
whatever, all that stuff. You just,
Yep.
and so having to actually make change, like some of the safety bulletins and things that we were able to actually change and put into effect that never existed before, that process is so
Yep.
large. And understanding the complexity of that and how things get done, it was so encouraging to me, not discouraging, surprisingly, because when you don't understand
No.
how it gets done, it's just frustrating. And you're just like, why aren't things better? Or why isn't this changing? And then when you get involved, you start to understand, oh, it involves negotiating, or it involves like to get a safety bulletin made, which is an industry
Yeah.
standard, right, industry standard of safety. It has to be
Yeah.
agreed
Yeah.
upon by the producers, the, Callow show, whatever, and all of the unions, and everybody has to find wording that they accept. And that, I don't think I didn't understand that before. I just thought, oh, there's just this roster system out there, there's this thing of safety that just applies to the West Coast or whatever. But
No,
there's so
it's
much
so
more than
much
that.
more
And
than
I think
yeah.
being able to be part of that is very valuable. I recommend it. I
Yeah.
couldn't recommend it more highly to any member, just to go
Yeah.
through it, to experience it. It doesn't, it may be painful on a a level of challenging your self-awareness and your ability to communicate with other people, but
Yep.
it's not going to hurt you, in any way.
No, and and for anyone listening who, well, first of all, I think the easy thing to say is if you're in the local, there's monthly meetings in each of the regions, and you can go and sit in those meetings. I don't know specific to each region. You may have to call ahead of time and tell them you're coming or something to that effect. But everybody's welcome and encouraged, and actually, I guess potentially even obligated, but I'm not
Well,
sure
there's
about that.
also, I think
um,
there's, the structure of the union changes constantly, over time, so
yeah,
there are times where, we've gone through periods where the union has been sort of top down, and we've also gone through periods where it's been much more open to, I mean, and it's partly just the fact that our members are so busy. The working members don't have the
Yep.
time, and so it needs
That's
to have a structure. It needs to have a top down nature to it.
exactly. Yeah, which is why you also need a lot of people
Well,
involved, because sometimes, look, I haven't been to the last two national meetings just because
Right.
I haven't been able
Well,
to
and that's where
physically be
COVID
there,
really
and
helped
they're not
us, I think, because we were able to do stuff virtually, and so people didn't have to, it saves you all that transportation time.
Yep, no question. So tell me about safety, and maybe talk about the operator's job, or not job, but involvement in that.
Well, you taught
Because
me
I
a
think
lot.
that
I want to say that,
we're
you about making sure that you voice to your crew out loud, not just like, oh, they must know that I'm, whatever, but you actually, when you first get together, you say, I I will look at, I'm here to look out for your safety if you need any help or need someone to stand up for you. And I care whether you get home at night, and I care, that you get food, and that you're safe. And so if
yeah.
you have any concerns, the door's open. And I've been through stuff before. I may not know how to solve this problem, but I'm willing to work with, to support you and
Yeah, that's what I always try to tell people is, look, I'm not an expert by any means. I mean, maybe I know a little bit more because I've been involved in the safety committee and we've probably talked about it more or whatever. But the bigger thing is like, part of having any job where you're moving up in the ranks is that you accept some responsibility. And the last thing I always am afraid of is that someone, a PA or someone who's like, oh, I don't want to make any noise, is actually afraid of a safety, has a safety
Well,
concern
one of the
and
things
won't
we talked
voice it.
about a lot when
And
on the safety committee, is how do we change the culture on our sets? Kind of like we have been changing with diversity and with Me Too and everything else. Like for everybody, I'm not just talking about me. When I say Me Too, for me, it's not just women; it's everybody being able to say, you know, that we're all
sure,
equal and that we all should be respected. And
yeah,
and so, when people talk about safety, there is a culture on our sets where you're not allowed to talk about it. And so, just having the safety meeting every day, doing that kind of stuff, it's a lot of
hmm
people. I hear this all the time, and like, well, oh, it's just covering liabilities. If they say we're responsible, if they, we don't, they want to put that on us now. They want us to, you know, police that ourselves or whatever. And I always say now, and I just feel this, I believe in this so strongly that it's not, that is a factor. Liability is a factor, of course. Of
yeah,
course, but that is not, to me, the most important factor. The most important factor for me is that it is being talked about out loud on set in the same way that you talk to your
it's
crew or whatever.
it's on the
That if
table. Yeah,
one person, if it's talked about, then it is no longer taboo, and it is something that it gives
yeah,
one step closer to each crew member feeling like they can say something.
yeah. And one of the other
It's
things, like
okay.
you said, it's about creating an atmosphere and an environment where you can speak up. But the other thing is, and some people don't recognize this, is the employer's obligation is to have a safe working environment. And what I always tell people is, you could say that they're completely insincere. I actually don't think that they are. I mean, maybe they'd like to look away from some things, but in the end, I think most of them do. But the thing is, we're the people in the working environment. So if we don't bring something up, they may legitimately not know about it, even if we
Yeah.
feel they should. So what I always tell people is, it's not about their obligation to us. I mean, that doesn't change, but we have to give them the feedback in order to do something. And yeah, it may be a thorn in the side. But the other thing that I like about, especially the safety meetings, and yes, people do poo-poo them, is 9 times out of 10, an AD will say something to the effect of, "Look, if you have a
Yeah.
problem, please let me know." And so then you now have the opening where if you go to them and they go, oh, don't bring this to me, you go, no, you just said to me that if we have a problem, so I'm doing that, so it again, to me, that's obligation. But on that note, you and I had Happyish was one of my personal, I view Happyish from the safety things that we did on that show as a complete and utter win across the board. You want to tell people what we came up with? And I think it just came up with you and I having a conversation about why, like, don't we were talking about why
Well,
don't we
yeah,
always
I
have
think the
safety
culture
meetings
has
or something?
changed enough that maybe people aren't as familiar the situation we were in hopefully isn't the same, and that is this that
Yeah,
they would only do safety meetings if there was a stunt or if there was a and it was kind of
that's
like
right.
that
Yep.
because I mean there's two things about safety. One is that you want people to be able to talk about safety and you want people to be able to bring things up, but that's the worst case scenario. You want people to be
Yes.
prepared weeks before for any situation that might be dangerous so that you don't even have to have that conversation on the set. It's the worst case scenario that you're dealing with in the moment on the set, and that's when accidents and horrible things happen, right? And so
Yeah.
we were talking, how ADs back then. Now, I mean, the last few sets I've been on, the ADs every day have a safety meeting because, as we know, there are different actors there every day. There's different background there every day. Even if you're on a stage, everyone needs to know where everything.
Yep.
But there was a lot of resistance, and that was also before the ADs had more safety language in their contracts, which they are now more officially responsible for more things. So there has been some change. But on that job with you, they were not doing safety meetings every day, and they there was like stuff in the fire lane all the time. There was things that were concerning that just weren't being taken seriously. And I remember we went to the AD and we're like, I know it's really boring to have to stay at the safety meeting every day. Like, what can we do to make it less, like if you don't want to do it every day, we're what if we did it? What if we got a crew member to do it every day? To just anybody, we'd find one person. It wouldn't just be like, who wants to do it? It would be we'd find someone who would do it, and we'd give them a little cheat sheet. What are the points we need to say? So we all had to learn that, and then we would find someone, and it was so not. It took on like a quality that I never would have expected at all.
It took
It
on a
was
life of its own. It was amazing. Well, by the way, what I remember is when you and I, well, there's a couple of things I want to back up on. First of all, the reason why I think this whole thing happened was because you were standing next to the camera and I was on the camera. You were not off in some other room. And that's actually sometimes when these
yeah,
conversations
true.
happen. So just on that note, but I remember we went to the AD and I think it was a woman. I can't remember, but I think one of the things that she said to us, which made us start thinking along this lines was, look, every time we're on stage, it's the exact same thing. And I just drone on and nobody listens. And part of what I'm always worried about is like, I want them to listen. So if I do it the same thing every day, and then I think you and I went back and we're like, well, what if
Yeah,
other people
yeah, and
did
also
it?
because it felt like if our
Yeah,
goal is to make it okay for people to talk about safety, why don't we start with something really safe, like a script that everyone, and then
yeah,
share it? And it turned into this thing, where not only were people from different departments like taking it and owning it. It was so empowering. It was incredible. But also,
it was
people
great.
got really creative with it. Remember our sound mixer? She sang it, right? She had an
I,
opera, you know?
I just interviewed
Yeah.
Jen, and I have the video, which I have to
Yeah,
find. She
like it
sang like
was
a Broadway
amazing.
show
And
too.
then we also had day players like special effects guys or stunt people or different people who actually wanted to do it, and they would tell stories. So it wasn't just they would do the script, but they
Oh
would
yeah.
also say, and like my brother, got killed on set or whatever, and
I remember that. By the way, I remember that very specifically. He was a special effects guy who was with us
yeah,
for like 2 days, and he heard it and he came up and he asked maybe you or maybe me, what is this? And we told him, and he said, could I do it tomorrow? And then he got up and he said, and the one thing is, don't drive home tired, because I think it was
yeah,
his brother or his brother-in-law. He said, did that and didn't make it home. And I remember there was
yeah,
like silence, and if ever, and it was so impactful. And I think I vaguely remember him saying something to the effect of, I don't really discuss
Yes.
this, but I'm so impressed with what you're doing. And I remember thinking, like, this
Well,
is
and
a
then we had
thing.
a really long
That was an
day,
amazing.
and remember one of the PAs, like,
Yeah.
was like we were all looking. So everyone then made more of an effort every time we had long days or did anything with
Yeah,
travel.
there's no question. You remember? I think the last day. Do you remember the four
They did
PAs
like a
did a
beatbox,
rap?
yeah, the whole, yeah, like
They
of
did
the
a
whole thing.
beatbox
That
rap.
was
It was so
amazing,
great.
amazing. I wish we had that on video.
Yeah, it was so great. But for anybody who's listening, actually, it is worth mentioning that on any day where there was an actual stunt or there was an actual this or that, the first AD did the safety meeting. It was on sort of the quote unquote boring days. But I remember one of the first. I think you may have done the first one, and I remember very specifically because I didn't know this. That you kind of went through the thing and you said this and that and you said, when we're on the stage, and I just want to explain why the fire lanes are important, because if there is a fire and if there's smoke and you can't see, you feel your way to the outside wall and then you have to feel along the wall to get to the exits. But if there's stuff in the way, there's going to be a pileup. So you have to keep it clear. And I went, I never thought about it. That's amazing. And then the other part of the whole thing that I remember, I don't remember whether you came up with it or I went up with him with it, but one of us was up in the production office and we're never up in the production office, or I'm never up in and they have that board of like, call and lunch and first shot or whatever. And I just went to the UPM and I said, could we put safety meeting up there? And you mark down the time. And she said, why? And I said, because then it becomes something that's important, that gets reported, that has to be done. And someone can look and go, wait, was a safety meeting? Just like you'll go, did they break for lunch, or whatever. And they did that. And I thought that was so great. And it was an amazing thing to be a part of. And I haven't been able to
I have
replicate that
not
anymore,
either, and I have
unfortunately.
tried, and I don't know, Dave. I wonder. Like, I always go, what was it about that? The fact that I think it's that thing that
Yeah,
they taught us at union school, which is it's not the first
yeah.
person that leads the movement; it's the second person who joins the dance.
It is. It is no question. I think the fact that we were sort of tag teaming, pushing it forward, but also it was a wacky group of people, and that,
Yeah,
that didn't
yeah.
hurt things. But yeah, I tell that story quite often, and I think I think it made people think,
It
which is
definitely
what you
was
want to
the. I
do
mean, the
more than
atmosphere
anything.
on that job, which I, again, like you said, I haven't really experienced it since then, is that people talked about safety without, there was no stigma to it. None at all.
There was
And
none.
we were
Yeah,
all
because it
allowed to
was
care for each
well,
other and
because it
care
was the
about
same.
each other.
Exactly, and because it created an
It
atmosphere where
wasn't threatening.
everybody took
Yeah, like to
ownership.
production.
Again,
It wasn't threatening to the
yeah.
producers. They wanted to know, you know?
And for the most part, as I remember, it wasn't hard once it got going and they understood it. It wasn't hard to find people to do it. Like, people wanted to do it, and it was yeah, it was that was a pretty cool thing. Um, well, listen, this has been fantastic. I want to thank you for doing this, for all the stories, for all the tips, for everything. It's always fun to talk to you. We're on separate coasts, so we don't get to work together as much as I would like to, but maybe one of these days. But the thing I leave everybody with, sort of in closing, is to take us out. Any tips you have for someone getting in the business today, for someone trying to get into operating, for Heather Norton 20 years ago, from Heather Norton today? You have any thoughts?
I think I went to this thing at the DGA Theater, and it was this woman who was she's a creator who's mostly a documentary filmmaker. She did the Queen of Versailles and some pretty high profile one about Imelda Marcos recently, that are large documentary scale documentaries. But she does also commercials on the side to do to pay the bills, and she's the one who created the Like a Girl campaign, like throw like a girl, do whatever, like, whatever. And so her advice to young directors and people getting into the business was find your voice, you know, and then the rest will happen. Because and I thought about that because it was very moving, first of all, but also, like, when I took the Local 600 operator course, which is really like a C camera operator course. It's not like the SOC stuff, which is much more oriented towards A camera skills and B camera skills. But they would have people come in and talk about their stories, and they always talked about where they came from, like whether it was music videos or whatever drew them into the business and where they're made them want to do more. And I think that the confidence you need to be able to do it comes from being able to connect with the material that you're working with personally on whatever level. And someone else said to me recently that, oh, this was actually Reed Morano, and she didn't say it to me, but I heard it at one of her events, and she said that it's like operating is like you're like one of the actors in a scene, that you're there and you're reacting and you're present in a way that is like you're an actor on the set with them. And that really spoke to me because for me, I started out in theater. I always feel very sympathetic with the actors. I always feel very connected to them, and I hadn't clicked that. It hadn't clicked for me yet until I heard her say that, and I was like, yeah, that's it. That's why I'm there, And I think we all have to feel like there's a reason that we're there as an individual and it's part of that group. And whether you end up being operator or whatever you end up doing, that's I don't like looking at the very hierarchical camera department as a necessary stepping stone that you have to go from one thing to the next. And so, when I talk to young people now, it's like a lot of them are already shooting stuff. A lot of them are already doing all that. And a lot of the, you'll end up talking to someone who's like a crane tech or, doing something, and they've shot tons of stuff, but this is what they're doing now, and they're bringing their knowledge, so I think it's just about looking for the opportunities, making sure you aren't so busy that you don't have have some ability to step onto the opportunities when they come, and hopefully when they come you can bring that thing that makes you your own self, that's the most valuable thing you can bring.
I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. We'll be back soon with another great episode. Don't forget to check us out on theop.io for all sorts of information on operating and storytelling. So thanks for listening and have a great day.